Welcome to the Free Marketeers, the official podcast of the Free Market Foundation. Hello listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Free Marketeers. I'm Martin van Staden, and I'm joined as always by Mpiyakhe Dhlamini and Christo Hattingh here at the Free Market Foundation. We have quite a bit to talk about this week. Nothing really exciting happened like the State of the Nation of last week, but a few things did come up in the news, and I think what happened shortly after the State of the Nation was President Ramaphosa was talking about the need to cut government spending, and the way he proposed to do this is twofold. Firstly, by reducing the number of cabinet departments, and there was talk of a economic super ministry, basically the Department of Small Business, Economic Development, Trade and Industry, all being merged into one, and thereby reducing the amount of ministers and especially the amount of deputy ministers. That seems pretty uncontroversial. I think all of us at the FMF would agree about that, although I'm not sure that. I think he forgot to mention that the problem is the amount of civil servants, not the amount of ministers. And then the second leg of it, which is slightly more contentious, I would say, and definitely more controversial, is this idea to reduce the amount of provinces in South Africa. Now, as you know, we have 9 provinces, and I think the president's recommendation, and I think this was a decision taken by his party in 2011, if I am not mistaken, to reduce that number to 6 provinces. Now, I'm not sure if they've said which provinces will be merged and so forth. I don't know if any of you guys know, but I was wondering, so Chris, what do you think about the general idea of consolidating provinces and basically centralizing more power at the national level?
Well, I might be a bit of a, what's the word, an alarmist with these things, but my general rule of thumb or sort of principle is, if any move is made to centralize government power to concentrate it, it's a bad thing, as a rule, because it concentrates more power in fewer hands. Sort of the idea of state capture, this, we're all surprised at how this has come about, but it's because the state is so big. Yeah. It's very lucrative, and government inherently attracts. It's a very easy way to make money, to be a politician and in government. So obviously it's going to attract, criminal elements. Yeah. So obviously you can tell us from the legal, aspect what you think of all the technicalities and things, but I think as a general rule, it's sort of it's a concerning move to concentrate power. So
so Mpiyakhe, I mean, our executive director at the FMF, Leon Lowe, wrote a book in the late 1980s, South Africa Dissolution, which basically proposed radical decentralization, basically the creation of cantons on the Swiss model, which are basically hundreds of provinces in South Africa rather than the 9 we ended up with. What do you think about this whole thing?
No, I was just about to say, just taking on the spirit of the solution and saying that if this proposal was coming along, and then they was coming along with a proposal to also give more power to municipalities, for example, then it might be more acceptable, because it would be taking us closer to that canton system, which would be brilliant for South Africa. I mean, if you had more power at the local level, people could have their concerns addressed more easily by people who live near to them, and the budgets would also be local, and taxation would also be local, and you wouldn't have this problem of dissidence, of holding people accountable because they are in Pretoria and you are here in some rural parts of KZN. So that would have been great, but it seems on the face of it to be nothing more than a cynical move to sort of disempower the opposition. So basically, what you would call in the USA, I believe they would call it gerrymandering. Yeah. So I think it's sort of something like that, where you just redraw the provincial boundaries to suit the ANC, and I mean, if they have the power to do that, so then they will likely do it anyway. But we should be aware as citizens what's going on, and
and I mean, just to get into the constitutional aspect of it, our constitution is very focused on the idea of accountability, about popular democracy and so forth. And to me, it seems to not make sense in that constitutional logic to want to reduce the amount of provinces. And basically, if you're in the Northern Cape and Cape Town becomes your provincial capital, government is being literally taken away from you rather than close by in Kimberley, for example, if that were the plan. So it doesn't really make sense on our constitutional logic. But then also, which I think is probably going to be a saving grace, is that the provincial legislature that of the province that you wish to change the boundaries of to merge into another province needs to by a majority agree. So at least as far as the Western Cape goes, I think it's guaranteed that they would disagree. They would not allow that. The other provinces may probably, or depending on what is offered, agree, which is going to be quite unfortunate. But for the future, especially if opposition parties in general wish to win other provinces. So
But
yeah,
I would think that we have people like even within the ANC. I would assume that not everyone is on board with this. I would bet that we will see as this proposal makes its way up the chain. But I would assume like for example in provinces like KZN, just seeing how contentious something as simple as moving one municipality from KZN to somewhere else, how that becomes. So I would say that maybe the ANC will find surprising that a lot of its own members oppose some of the specificities of this proposal. So, but we'll see. We don't know yet. We'll see.
yeah, and I mean with those, especially when you come to the local level, municipalities and provinces, it seems like there's a lot of more political violence there, and that sometimes spills into the streets of civilians. And yeah, I mean, South Africa really has this crime problem, and it's unfortunate that it goes into the politics of it.
Martin, I wanted to ask you about endemic crime and that sort of thing in South Africa, and interrupt me if I'm sort of messing around with your topics here, but you wrote an article on gun rights and this sort of thing in South Africa. But don't you think that's also part of government trying to control citizens' firearms? Isn't that also exacerbating, adding to the sort of violence that we see in municipalities and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I wrote an article for City Press today on Friday, and basically it's about this firearms control amendment bill that was leaked in October of 2018, that basically says the reasoning of self-defense as a reason for acquiring a firearm license will fall away. So the Firearms Control Act currently says you can acquire a firearm license for the following reasons, and one of those is self-defense of yourself and your property and so forth. They want to take that away, and of course the government's reasoning for this is that they want to get more guns off the streets and so forth. But geez, call me a cynic, and I do call myself a cynic, but I am not sure that we're at that stage where the SAPS is in any kind of position with 57 murders a day, rape every 4 minutes, to be saying we need to take guns from civilians and they should just trust us we'll defend them. I don't know. What do you think about the level of violence and how to react to that, Mpiyakhe?
I completely agree with you there. I mean, if it's just it should be just a basic right that everyone has, that you are able to defend yourself. If your life is in danger, you should be able to defend yourself. There shouldn't even be a question around that. I mean, it should be just a basic thing. So if the police can't guarantee that to you, as we stand here in South Africa, and even if we had the most efficient police force, I don't see how anyone would ever be able to guarantee that to you. That we will be there as soon as you need someone to defend you. Will be there immediately, which is that's impossible. So gun rights are always going to be something that is important for people to have.
Yeah, and Chris, well, what's your take on the crime in South Africa and I guess we can't call it the right to bear arms here, but basically the human right to defend yourself with appropriate tools?
I was going to say, even if you have the most efficient, capable state in the world, with however many police officers you think is adequate, it's not a matter of sort of that utilitarian way of looking at it. It's a matter of a right, and you have the it flows from your individual rights to your property and yourself. That is the right to defend yourself against any threats. That doesn't mean that you drive around in the street shooting off your gun. It's when someone like invades your property kind of thing, whether it's the state or another person or anything like that.
I was just about to say forgive me if this is controversial, but you should be able to defend yourself even against the states. We saw in Zimbabwe recently, there was one picture where soldiers were going to someone's house, and that person had a rifle, and then they basically chased the soldier away with their rifle.
I was going to say, whether the state ever acts on its monopoly on force or not, you having your gun is your, you know, sort of, I'm not saying your gun is going to help you against a tank or whatever, but it's just that principle that you're securing yourself, whoever comes and attacks you.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think I've been told that research shows that people who defend themselves with their own firearms, it's usually not successful. Now, I don't know if that's true. I think it seems a little bit suspicious, but to me, it's about, don't take my chance away. No. Don't say you'll probably not succeed, and therefore we're gonna take your ability to own a firearm away. For me, it's about, if I have only a 5% chance to save myself, my family, or my property from someone who is coming to my house, I would very much like that chance. I mean, call me a bit of a chancer on that, but I want that chance.
Well, just on that particular stats, Martin. What you can get different things from data if you look, depending on how you look at it. One of the things that we know for sure is that if you restrict firearm ownership in any way, what tends to happen is that violence tends to increase in societies. But then if you don't restrict it, then that's when you either get a decrease or violence stays the same. So that's what we know. So I won't say that there's a pro or anti-gun argument, but it does seem that it does help to allow people to own guns freely. Yeah.
Just from a practical point of view, I was going to say, because we know that there are lots of problems with efficiency and that sort of thing with the South African state in general and then the police. So if you take away law-abiding citizens' guns, that doesn't mean that guns aren't going to be available on the black market for criminals and that sort of thing. I mean, we see this in Cape Town, in the Cape Flats. Illegal guns are endemic and widely available. So that doesn't mean just because the police destroys like a stockpile there, it won't come through border or whatever.
Yeah, no, look, the fact is that even though civilians, in a pure number sense, lose more firearms than the police, as a proportion, the police lose far more firearms. There's about 2.5 million civilian firearm owners in South Africa, and there's about 150,000 police officers in South Africa. I mean, as just a proportion of the total, police lose far more. So even if the civilian population is totally disarmed, the police are going to quote unquote lose. I don't know if we should say they've lost them. Maybe they've sold them. Maybe they've given them away. Maybe. They supply them.
Supply and demand. I mean, we are free marketers after all.
Yeah, and I mean that happens. And you mentioned the border. South Africa isn't known for having a very strong border, and I don't necessarily want it to have a strong border. But the fact is, a criminal who wants a firearm is going to get a firearm. They are very creative. They don't care about import dues and customs and all these things. They're going to get a firearm. And people like us, ordinary civilian, law-abiding citizens, we feel very bad when we break the law. Even if we disagree with the law, something in our system tells us this doesn't feel right. A criminal does not have the same reaction. They really don't care. But yeah, so talking about potentially the ability to resist state tyranny and totalitarian states and so forth. Mpiyakhe, you recently talked to me about something that's happening in China. Basically, that the current president is trying to angle for a reassertion of the dominance of state-owned enterprises there, even though the private sector is what I believe probably caused China's massive growth over recent years. I mean, you want to talk a bit about that?
So basically, this came from an article written by Kabelo Khumalo in the Star, and basically the points that he was making was that Xi Jinping seems to be wanting to put the emphasis more on what the state-owned enterprises can do, as opposed to the emphasis put by someone like Deng Xiaoping, which was more on the private sector, making sure that the private sector thrives, getting it out of its way. And then so this guy wants to have a go back to sort of not go back per se, but sort of put more of the emphasis on the state-led economy. And it's just failing badly for China because they are diverting resources away from the private sector to the state-owned economy. And then now what has happened is that they are in their lowest economic. They have had their lowest economic growth rate in 30 years. And so this seems to be one of the major factors affecting that. And so if they don't reorientate and sort of continue liberalizing, then they should, basically what's needed there is that they need to abandon these state-owned companies and just sell them and then privatize everything, and then just get out of the way of the private sector.
Yeah, no, and I mean, if you look at their special economic zones, now the way I understand it is that there's virtually no economic law that applies in those areas, and that is what caused China's massive growth over recent years. And I find it funny. Our executive director Leon Low always tells a story that a bunch of South Africans went on a fact-finding mission from government to China to find out what's this country doing to grow so great. And so at that time we had our industrial development zones and so forth, and they came back and they said, well, it was simple at the time. We have to rename our industrial development zones to special economic zones. And then they introduced the Special Economic Zones Act, and which is now law. And now we have all these great special economic zones, which I'm surprised, because as before they are standing empty and unproductive. And I wonder why. I mean, Chris, can you tell me why our special economic zones are not functioning the way they should be? Maybe some taxes and regulations?
Well, we always know that just applying the right word to reality makes reality different. So if they can just hit on the right word, everything will fall into place. But it doesn't, in substance, it doesn't mean anything to put these buzzwords and things to say that this zone is called this now or that, if you don't change the whole environment around it, if you don't do anything about relaxing regulations, taxes as well, and government didn't do anything of substance. It's again just a sort of ticking boxes idea where let's look like we're doing something, but in substance, we don't actually do the hard yards kind of thing. We don't take the medicine for the short-term pain to resolve the long-term sort of suffering. You sort of take the chemotherapy now because it's your best chance to beat the cancer, even though it's gonna to have all these other effects on you, but you try and do your best.
So I for one hope that South Africa follows the example of China while it was still prioritizing the private sector in the special economic zones, turn all of South Africa into a real special economic zone, lower taxes by an insane amount, reduce regulations, and you'll see the type of growth that China saw in past years. And then just as a final topic for today's show, I think the government has gotten around to sending the AARTO Act. I believe it's the Administrative Adjudication of Traffic Offences Act. I'm sorry if I got that abbreviation wrong. But basically, they're introducing I think it's the Australian model of a demerit system, that if you do have any traffic infringements, you get a parking ticket or whatever, it detracts from your license, and then if you fall below a certain amount, and then this is not you don't have to go to the police or anything, it's just like an automated system, then you can't renew your license. After a certain amount, you're going to lose your license, going to be suspended automatically, stuff like that. So I have very strong opinions on traffic law in general, which I'll get to. But first, Chris, what do you think about government's new approach to guarding us on our roads?
I'm surprised that they haven't gone further and just told us that the speed limit is now 60 kilometers an hour in all zones, because if you regulate these things, people they're just going to stop breaking the law.
Of course.
So that sort of thing. No, it sort of goes to what I was just saying, about things of substance. If you don't change things around education and training and that sort of thing, it's never gonna. You won't see a change and we see a lot of death on our roads, especially around Easter and these sorts of things. But I don't think. The only thing I'm not even surprised at, I guess we'll just see more people in jail kind of thing. So maybe get used to visiting your family members in jail around holidays, and especially when traffic officers step up these sorts of roadblocks and things around Christmas time, festive times. That's when they follow through on stuff. But if there's no concerted effort, then I don't I think it's again just sort of a shot in the dark.
Mpiyakhe, what do you think?
I think it will definitely raise the price of bribes. I think that's about the only thing that it will do. Because it's putting the emphasis on enforcement. So the people who enforce these road traffic laws will just be able to charge more for their things. So that's what's going to happen. That's my prediction, knowing South Africans and how easy they are to bribe. So
Yeah. No, look, so as I said, I have pretty strong views about traffic law in general. To me, it doesn't make sense to talk about this thing of traffic law because practically everything is a regulation. So this AARTO Act is a framework, but basically all of it says the Minister of, I think it's transportation nowadays, of transport, may make regulations about whatever. And the most infamous thing about this is the speed limit. It's completely arbitrary.
No.
Parliament doesn't have to talk about it. There's no democratic involvement at all. It's just the minister saying, oh, I think on highways the speed limit should now go down to 200, no, what? Wow, no, to 100. And I think that's, they talked about a year ago. They haven't gotten around to implementing it, but it's basically reducing all current speed limits by around 20 k's an hour.
Okay.
Completely arbitrary. It has nothing to do with the actual road that it's on.
No.
You may have a 60 k's per hour speed limit on a perfectly clear day on a straight road right through the middle of the Free State, no cars in any direction, a perfect road, no potholes. You have to drive along 60 k's an hour. It is completely arbitrary. And then, of course, this thing about roadblocks that you mentioned, which is probably my greatest criticism against law enforcement in South Africa at this stage. If you drive on the Western Bypass here in Johannesburg, past the William Nicol off-ramp, you always see at least like 3 or 4 Metro Police officers standing there receiving bribes and so forth, writing tickets. When our inner city in Johannesburg is a crime fest that is basically a war zone. So I always wonder, maybe those Metro Police officers have something better to do. And that's just a thing that bothers me. And I think it's this whole thing about traffic law is a massive waste of police resources. I mean, these are armed people standing on the side of the road harassing motorists and so forth. So yeah, to me, traffic law should simply be, you need to be considerate and you shouldn't be reckless. That is what the totality of traffic law should be, as far as I'm concerned. And I mean, in countries like Germany on the Autobahn, there's no speed limit. I think they don't have nearly as many traffic accidents as we do. So yeah, there's just a simpler answer to this massive problem that we have, and it's just going to be cheaper in general.
Just tying this into our general South African obsession with corruption, I think this sort of thing is an example of it's creating small spheres for corruption in everyday life. And the more this sort of thing, that arbitrariness that you talk about, the more you sort of make it possible for that thing to flourish, you know, it's like little mushrooms all over then why are you surprised that you see corruption on the bigger level? That's how you operate in daily life, so it's simply going to become the norm.
Yeah, the fact is, if you can decide between spending a weekend in jail or paying a bribe, every time you're going to choose the bribe. It's an invitation to corruption. And that the law should be more aware of this. And I address a lot of this in my upcoming book, The Constitution and the Rule of Law, which will be freely available on the Free Market Foundation's website and on the Rule of Law Project's website. It's at www.ruleoflaw.org.za. Yeah, it's also going to be free in hard copy here, so get here while it lasts. Mpiyakhe, anything to add on traffic?
No, I was just about to. I agree completely with you. This discretionary sort of lawmaking, so allowing people to, for example, one of the things that judges will have less of a role to play in adjudicating traffic offences now. So more of the emphasis is going to be on traffic officers. Giving them that much power is just inviting corruption. So that's why I said the price of a bribe is going to go up, and so we should budget for that. Bribes are going up.
Yeah, the moment you see legislation ousting the jurisdiction of the courts, you should be very concerned. That's usually the start towards a gold mine for corruption and for abuse and so forth. But yeah, I think that covers our topics for today. As always, please subscribe to the Free Market Foundation's YouTube channel. That is the big red button right under this video. Follow us on Twitter. It is at FMF South Africa, one word. On Facebook, we are Free Market Foundation South Africa, or in the URL facebook.com/FMFSA. And yeah, please share this video, /podcast with your friends. And yeah, have a nice weekend, and cheers.